liches, vampires, giant evil dragons, and conniving fairies.
Conniving fairies. Nice.
These all paint a picture in your brain of scheming, awful, mean things, right?
Right.
We're doing the villain episode. It's the villain episode.
Let's do it. Villains.
So let's just do a quick definition. Definitions are always good. Villains are your antagonist. They are the people that you're rooting against in the story.
Right.
You do not want these guys to win because they are the antithesis of everything that is good and what we stand for. People like Voldemort.
Yeah, he's a villain.
He's a tried and true villain, right?
Yep.
Like, he's just a bad guy. So the question I want to ask you then is, like, to kind of get it percolating a little bit and thinking about this, what are some of your favorite villains, if not, like, your favorite villain?
You know, there's a lot of ways to look at that. So one of my favorite villains is not even in a game. He could be. He should be. He ought to be. I've used parts of him in some of my games, but if you recall the movie Fifth Element,
Yep.
okay, Zorg.
Oh, that's Gary Oldman, right?
Gary Oldman is one of my favorite villains of all times. Like, it's the evil mastermind that has nothing but buffoons working for him.
Right.
Because he doesn't. The reason he's my favorite villain is because he's a mastermind of evil, but he doesn't know how to teach his minions how to be masterful.
He does that great job of showing the disconnect between, like, pure intellect,
right,
and common sense.
Yeah.
As he cannot bridge that. Like, that's his villain flaw, right? It's like he can't bridge that gap.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that villain.
Yeah.
I use it in a lot of my inner dialogue. It's been there for a long time.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a fun villain. And, like, he's kind of like, he's just like a salesman at the end of the day too, isn't he? Like, he's just like a corporate.
Yeah. I mean, he's the boss of his little empire, but he's just a.
Because he's kind of like organized crime, but, like, under the face of
He's like
a legitimate business.
The CEO of Amazon.
Yeah. He's like a
Amazon
true
CEO.
Yeah. He's like the true, like, corporate villain personified.
I'll sell you a crate of exploding hyper rifles.
Yeah.
But I don't care what you do with them.
Yeah. What you do with them is none of my business.
Right.
Yeah. He's got the, like, yeah. So I want to talk about, let's go down that vein a little bit, like the not so, like, cartoonishly evil guys, right? One of my favorite depictions of a villain is Yuri Orlov, Lord of War, Nicolas Cage.
Oh, yep.
I know we're talking movies right now, but, like, it'll roll in.
Right.
Basically, he's a guy that fell into, like, arms dealing, and he's a weapons dealer. He's based on a real life guy.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And long story short, he just, like, sells guns and grenades to whoever wants to buy them.
Whoever can afford them.
Yeah, and he's very good at. He's very charismatic and very prepared.
Right.
That was one of the big things that struck me as, like, fascinating about him as a villain. Was, like, he's kind of a unwilling villain.
Yep.
Like, he has a set of morals, kind of.
Right.
Like, but at the end of the day, it's just the transaction that matters. As long as you're conducting business.
Right.
Like, his code of honor is, like, you honor the contract, basically. You know, if I sell you something, you pay me for it, and then you never bother me about it again. Like, it's our contract.
Right. We're done. Now move on. Next contract starts when you have money to buy something new.
And then his preparedness was one of the other things. Like, his backups for backups, the contingency plans, right?
Right.
I think contingencies are a great way to, like, showcase your villain, like
Yeah.
to make them feel like, oh, but I had a plan for this, you know. And that can be cartoonish if you take it to a certain degree, which
Right.
can be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah. No, Gary, that's you're dead on. It's a good villain. I like that guy.
Yeah, and so now we have a couple like examples and tangible examples. What I would like to do, and I'd like to discuss a little bit, is not necessarily the villain themselves, but kind of like we just did with like Zorik. He's like corporate greed personified,
Right.
and he has this flaw of like he can't connect
Right.
the two. That's what makes him memorable, right?
Right.
And then, you know, the Yuri Orlov guy is like he's got his code of honor, and then he also has this like contingency, but that's also a flaw because he has to plan everything, and if it goes out of he didn't plan for something, he can't do it.
Right.
So I actually like to delve into what makes villains tick and what makes them interesting.
Right.
So I guess I'll jump onto the next one then.
Okay.
Have you seen Inglourious Bastards?
Yes. But
So
I'm vague on the details. I mean, I'll remember stuff when you're talking to me about it, but
Christoph Waltz plays a Nazi SS Gestapo officer, basically.
right.
And he's just this absolutely despicable character.
He's very good at it too.
Yeah, he's extraordinarily good at
Yeah.
it. He sold that role. And one of the interesting things about him is he's this kind of like, who's the Cousteau, right, from Pink Panther?
Yep.
He's kind of this like, or Sherlock Holmes. Or he's like this. He's this extraordinarily intelligent, charismatic detective. But he's also terrifying.
Right.
And the reason he's terrifying is as one of these first scenes you see him in, and basically the whole time throughout the movie, they do this awesome job of like not letting the audience know if he actually knows what's going on. He gives the impression that he knows
Right.
the plot, the what's going on, the all this, the all that. He knows that these guys are, you know, imposters. He knows that the gal that ran the theater got away from him as you know, a few years ago, basically.
Right.
And it's like he has this phenomenal selling point of like the villain, the guy who you don't know what he knows,
Right.
and so you're scared to say anything because you might let something slip. And that's a really interesting like villain characteristic,
Right. Yeah, no,
c-
absolutely.
because it really makes them feel. It makes you feel like you're on eggshells or walking on, you know.
Yep. Oh, I don't want to do this because he
yeah.
already knows.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
might catch me here, catch me there.
And then not even he already knows, but like, does he know?
Yep. It's the questions.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to put you on the edge of your seat and make you feel like, oh God, like, you know, it's almost
Right.
like gut wrenching. You're not sure what to
Yep.
say. Are there any other villain qualities that like stand out to you? Like interesting ways people have presented villains that you.
Right. Well, you know, yeah, I'd say one of my favorite ways to have a villain is to kind of adding on to what you talked about already, but in a different light, is I've always run with the idea of when I have a campaign or a setting or something I'm working on, I do have a villain, even if he doesn't show up in that campaign, amazingly enough. I have a villain that has like a mastermind plan going on through all my universes, whether it's sci-fi or it's the same villain.
Oh,
because
okay.
that's how my brain works to creating things. And that villain isn't necessarily even considered the bad guy. You might not know him. In one campaign, he might be the good guy.
Oh, okay.
Now, whether you could tie them together, whether they'll ever be tied together, it may never happen, right? Because you don't always play with the same people. But I have this back in second edition AD&D, they came out with Van Lichten's Guides to Liches.
Oh, Van Richten.
Van Richten.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Van Richten. Oh, Lichten. What the heck?
Liechtenstein.
Yeah, Liechtenstein. But they came out with this guide to liches, and they came out with the guides to all the undead.
Yeah, it was mummies, liches,
Yeah,
vampires.
they're really crazy books, and they go super deep in how to create bosses.
Yeah, it's like an 80-page book.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I read through the Lich one, and I'm just like, okay, this is the ultimate villain.
Yeah, they're
Because
awesome.
Liches are that character in. I don't know. I'm just specifically fantasy. You could probably take this across to anywhere, but Liches are those guys who have got to that amount, the precipice of power, that they can go on to godhood, quotes, and become essentially a god of whatever pantheon, whatever type they want, because that's just how powerful they are.
Yep.
The mortals have nothing left to offer them. They know what they can. The only thing they can get from mortals now is like basically pure worship and whatnot.
The belief.
Yeah, the belief. Well, in the book, they described all this stuff about liches. I thought, okay, so Asarak is kind of, I was familiar with him too. He's kind of a lich that just basically gives the gods the big F you,
Mm-hmm.
And so I like the evil that isn't necessarily evil. They're only evil because they just like to toy with the world around them. It has nothing to do with malicious intent. I mean, it can. Somebody gets on their nerves bad enough, or say in one of my campaigns, I have a bad guy, and well, ultimately he's just a minion of the big bad guy, and some good characters come along and mess up the bad guy's plans. I'm like, well, now the good guy's the big bad guy's got to come down and go like, all right, what the heck, man? This is quit messing with my minions, and it just, and then messes with the universe somehow because he can.
It's really awesome that you bring up. I've heard it pronounced. I don't know how many times, like different ways I've heard it pronounced. I always say a Sararak.
It's a Sararak, yeah.
So he's a demi-lich.
Yep.
Originally from the Tomb of Horrors.
Right.
And I like this idea because you have Vecna.
Yep.
And like these are like the two main like liches in D&D lore.
Right.
And Vecna is the one who wants to ascend to godhood and to be all powerful and all that.
Right.
And I can't remember who's apprentice. I think Sararak is Vecna's apprentice.
I think so.
And Sararak doesn't care.
Right. No.
Like you said it's not malicious inherently, the like
Right.
wanting to toy with things and
Right.
stuff. I've always thought of it as like sadistically curious.
Right. Yeah. Mad scientist.
Yeah, like the
It's like,
or the pull the fly wings off a fly to see what happens.
Just pull one wing off. Does he go in circles?
Yeah, does he go in, exactly? It's that kid with the magnifying glass and the
Right.
anthill. That's a Sararak.
Right.
And that's a whole interesting can of villainous worms
Yep.
to open up.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like the original module, the Tomb of Horrors module where he appears, is kind of brilliant.
Oh, yeah,
Because
absolutely.
it has all these false entrances. There's not even like anything hardly to fight in the dungeon.
No.
It's just this like literal tourist trap.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Tourist trap. Exactly.
But it's like a dungeoneer's trap. Because there's not even like you could have a 12th level party that could kill beholders and fight nightmares and all these dragons and all that, and it's like
Died in the
great.
first
How
trap.
useful is that? You don't have a thief to unlock the doors or to check for traps.
Right.
It was a whole new, and
Yeah.
it was not only it introduced a new way to play the game, right?
Yep.
Or not play the game, but like, what am I trying to get at? It was like a
Villains.
whole new.
It's a whole new villain way. Yeah.
And that idea of just taking the kid at the magnifying glass and giving him the power level of like a lich
Right.
is hilarious to me.
Oh,
But
it's absolutely insane.
it's insane. Exactly. It's just
Insane.
mad. Like it's just crazy.
It is. The point I was getting there was the books give you that option to make those guys actually come alive.
Yeah.
And yeah, Sararak is just, I mean, it's kind of, it wasn't like I intentionally went after him as my model because time I didn't know who he was, or at least in Crossing I knew who he was.
Yeah.
But there was no real. I didn't really look at any of the lore and stuff on it, so I didn't go into it too deep. But yeah, I mean that villain is my favorite. That favorite kind. I mean, other than Zord,
your archetype of villain.
Yeah, that's my archetype. Is the guy who can but doesn't necessarily. It's not necessarily with intent. It's that curiosity that I want to try everything at somebody else's expense.
And isn't that kind of how? Is it Hallister the Mad Mage? Is that his name?
Yeah, the one from
Dungeon of the Mad Mage, Underwater Deep there.
Yeah, I think so.
He's kind of got that vibe going on too. I feel like that's like a natural. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like a natural evolution. Like it's the end evolution, or like a final stage, late stage wizardry is like mad scientist lichdom.
Yeah, yeah. You
end up like Elminster.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Elminster, where you're. Well, no, exactly.
But it's funny because they're kind of doing the same thing, but one is just evil aligned, one is good aligned, right? So I want to talk about something kind of interesting here. Good villains.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who is lawfully good, but in an oppressive way.
Right.
Because I feel like that's something... It's always taken for granted that there's so much evil in the world in D&D that you could play a neutral character and fight evil and you wouldn't be upsetting the balance because there's so much evil, right?
Right.
But, like, what happens after... Like, look at The Witcher. The Witcher is actually a great example of this. Almost all of the monsters are dead at the time that we're actually following Geralt around.
Right.
Like, they talk about it a lot of, like, well, there used to be a time where Witchers were all over. And now there's, like... 20 of us basically because all the monsters are dead, and it's like, well, who's the monster now? Well, now the guys that were out slaying the monsters are viewed as the monsters.
Yep.
Because they're these supernatural things, right? And so that idea of like the good guy or the saving character becoming the villain is just very interesting to me.
Yeah, our modern day you just say that, and the thing that kind of comes to my mind real quick was Captain America versus Tony Stark, essentially.
Yeah.
Tony Stark,
who's the villain there?
Tony Stark, in my humble opinion, is kind of the villain in that because he wants to put up this big blanket to protect the world and enforce all these rules with AI robots, and Captain America's like, no, man, let's
vibe it out.
Humans will take care of it themselves, But then again, both of them could be. I mean, who's
Peacemaker?
Yeah,
is another great example. Yeah. I care so much about peace. I don't care who I have to kill to get it.
Yeah,
like it's like you're so zealous towards your goal of like peace and justice. To equate this back to D&D, it's the lawful good paladins.
Yep.
Planescape. I know I always reference Planescape, but there's a whole faction of people in Planescape that are basically like that peacemaker kind of vibe, and they're just you break a law, well, we're gonna break your legs. You jaywalk, we're gonna break your legs so you can never jaywalk again.
Right.
That's the mentality, and it's like, but we're doing it for the good because we're following the laws.
Exactly.
And it's like that's a villain. That's like, it's just the motive. It's a villain just wearing different clothing. And so it's always been a fascinating thing to me, like the motivations. And a lot of it too, you kind of talked about it a little bit. We didn't really put a name to it, but it's almost like a frame of reference or who's viewing it.
Right.
Because you were talking about that character of yours.
Yep. Sometimes
you say he's not the villain.
Yeah, no.
Or he might not appear like the villain.
Right, because you have that chaotic, say the chaotic evil or lawful evil group, which are, in my humble opinion, lawful evil is the true villains, because they rule in only selfishness and their own selfish laws based to only benefit them. Mm-hmm. That to me is like pure evil, right? And then like my main my main villain doesn't like that because he likes to watch the ants play and he likes to throw the grasshopper in the ant pile.
So he's chaotic.
Yeah, so he's chaotic, neutral, because he knows that if evil rules the world, then there's no more fun.
There's no good
There's
people
no more
to
fun
mess
left.
with,
Yeah, there's nothing left to do. Like, oh, this is boring. I'm going to move on. I don't want to deal with this universe anymore. I'll find a new one to mess with. It's kind of like viewing humanity as an ant farm. Every once in a while, we just need a good shake up, you know?
Yeah. It's funny that we mentioned like the alignments because there's always so many talks of alignments. We did a whole episode on alignments, right?
Yep.
And I've always liked my villains to be neutral evil, or neutral good.
Yep.
Neutral good's kind of a weird one because like neutral good to me is like the purest good.
Right.
Because it's like you don't care about laws or order. You're not structured.
Right.
You just want good.
But a neutral good guy in a system such as a feudal system
Could appear evil.
would be like Robin Hood type thing.
Yeah.
Robin Hood's like, I just want good for the people.
Yeah.
And the king's like, no, you cannot. This is our land.
Yeah.
You can't hunt my deer.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what?
Like, and the nice thing about the neutral is like you can dip into that chaotic
Yep.
of like breaking the laws and all this and that, but it benefits the people because you're serving the law of society, right? Or the law of like morality.
Yep.
And that's why I've always liked the Yugoloths in D&D.
Oh.
Because they're the neutral evil. They don't care about contracts, but they also are willing to make a contract if they have to.
Right.
If that's what it will take to get you to be evil.
Right.
Like they do not care. Like they will do whatever, you know.
Right.
They're not like, and they're not so lawful that they're so self-centered that they can't like
Right.
serve the purposes of something else. Like it's, I don't know, that I've liked that neutrality because it like lets me almost be more chaotic because like chaotic's predictable. You know they're going to be chaotic.
Absolutely.
Where the neutral, you're like, I don't know what they're going to do. And that's another big thing I liked. I guess let's talk sci-fi a little bit with this one.
Okay.
That's one of the things, and fantasy at the same time.
Right.
But that's one of the things I liked about like Tzeentch in 40K and Warhammer lore. Is this, and even even the chaos gods in general in Warhammer, they're so mysterious, and it's that unknown. What is their motivation or what is their plan?
Right.
You know, we talked about that with Hans Lambda, the Nazi hunter,
Yep.
or the Nazi SS Gestapo guy from Inglourious Bastards. How we don't know what he knows, and that unknown is scary. It's what makes him a compelling villain. Well, now we take that and go kind of further, and now we don't even know their motivation.
Right.
Like, we don't know anything about them. And, like, that gets into, like, Call of Cthulhu level stuff.
Right.
You know, with, like, Lovecraftian or cosmic horror, where, like, you don't even know what the thing wants, but it feels awful. It feels evil. It feels foreign. Like, and bringing that into your games can be really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's I love going down that. Taking what people think is evil, and or even what they think is what they think the status quo is, and changing it on them. That is, to me, what a good villain is about. Is not letting you get comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
You know, like I used the Pathfinder thing that we did when we first started. We did the module.
Oh, the hotel.
The hotel guy.
Yeah.
Like the first time you meet him, he's just a hotel guy. He's got some, money, and he's got some problems.
Doesn't he get beat up in a fight?
Yeah, he gets beat up in the fight. You guys meet him. He's just like this, and in the end, he's like a serial killer.
Yeah, and it was like this prudish high society, like,
right? Yeah.
Oh, dearie me, I've been struck, kind of like.
Yeah, and I kind of dig that villain. Yeah. With the villain I have, I made my world. I had ran a campaign, and I wanted my main protagonist villain. He wanted the group to. He wanted to see what would happen when you take a group of goody two-shoes and kind of turn the world upside down. Not necessarily throw them in a spot where he wants them to fight their way out, but he wants them to think their way out.
Okay.
And
making players think.
that's what he wanted.
That's a
he's
dangerous gambit.
He's like, okay, so I have these groups of problems I'm going to throw at these people, and I want to see how they react to it. And one of them is meshing of two universes, and in our universe, in the D&D universe, of course, goblins and kobolds and things are generally viewed as evil.
Yep.
Not necessarily evil. You know, they're not demons and devils, but they're not
They're self-serving.
They're self-serving. Well, the world they got put into, these were like the humans and the elves, the goblins and the kobolds. They were like the humans and elves, and they fought amongst themselves about their races, and the humans were like the dogs, kind of like the goblins of the world.
The second class.
Yeah, and instead of like, you know, I wish we could have went down that path farther, but the players I had were, not all of them, but some of them were definitely not wanting to deal with that. Because that was just too, it's because the unknown.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this? I don't, we're something that's completely opposite of what we want to do. Like, what do we do about it?
Yeah,
I guess that to me, that was a win for me. I'm like, okay, so my villain's awesome.
Yeah.
Like, the players have no clue how to deal with this. They interacted with the so-called bad races long enough to GTFO, you know, get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I had a very similar thing as well, where it had to do with kind of like what you're saying, where like everything was flipped on its head as far as like what each like race of creatures or whatever was associated with.
right.
And one of the first places I remember ever encountering that was in the Dark Sun setting.
Right.
Where the elves are like 7 feet tall and they're nomadic like huntsmen that live out in the desert, and the halflings are like little savage cannibals, and you're like,
Right.
what is this? Is so weird. You're
No, they're not cannibals.
yeah, and it's like that was really fun because it felt just so weird, like so strange. And it's kind of fun to go and like check out like the old sword and sorcery stuff or like some of those old authors, because
Right.
we have this like Tolkien high fantasy kind of Robert Jordan, like all of those authors kind of like painted the picture of what high fantasy and fantasy look like.
Right.
And so to go back and like dabble in like some of the older stuff is kind of wild. Like
It is.
like, and a lot of it's like a product of its time too, right? Like you can tell, like,
Right.
cause like just there's some weird things about it.
You could use Star Wars as a really good, and same thing with Star Trek to some extent. The space operas. Star Wars is literally modern. Well, back then, modern politics of the time, and you can compare it to modern politics of today. You know, it's literally the Galactic Empire, which would be the United States. It started off as a republic, turned into an empire.
So
it's all
there's
politics.
actually a really, really strong analogy, and the imagery that they chose to use and everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the Empire,
Yep.
it is literally like the Republic was early 1930s
Right.
Germany,
Yep.
and like the Chancellor,
Yep.
the senator who becomes Palpatine, the
Yeah. No,
Emperor.
it was modern day. But I use modern day loosely. but it's still modern day.
Like, and it's funny because people like, you know, we're in this day and age, and people look at that and like, oh my gosh, like the Empire in Star Wars is like cartoonishly evil. How wild is that? And it's like, that was real.
Yeah.
In the 1940s, World War I, 1930, 37, whatever it was, through 45. That's what Nazi Germany was.
Yeah.
Like it was.
I think that's why that show did so well with there were so many sci-fi space things coming out. I mean, Star Trek came out a little bit before that, because they already had a series, I believe, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there was all these other ones coming out trying to, we want to be the first sci-fi people. I think Star Wars hit it. George Lucas hit it. And, you know, Steven Spielberg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Literally because they took that. That was still fresh in the baby boomers and then the World War II people. That's all fresh in their minds still.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, this is why we like this, because they can relate it to the real world.
And then, so, like, let's talk about the villains then, right?
Yep.
So, that Vader is one of the most compelling villains in cinema history, probably.
Yes.
Like,
yes, I agree. He even from when I was growing, I think now that we know more, I think they could do more with him. So
what made Vader so scary, so compelling at the time?
Right.
Was he's kind of weird.
Yep.
He moves slowly. He's kind of herky-jerky movements, all this and that. We don't really know a whole lot about him, and there's the key, right?
Right.
We talked about it a little bit earlier. Vader is the, like, poster child of the unknown.
Right. Dude in black mask, black cape.
Just
speaks weird.
We don't know anything about him. Like, who is he? Who's the guy under the mask? What's all that? Like, there's so much unknown with Vader. And what we do see is basically him striking down Obi-Wan in, like, one swing. And we're like, wait, what? You know, like, this is supposed to be the guy that's, like, the master.
Saves the world,
Right? And, like, or, like, you see him in the intro just walking down the hallway, and, like, all the people are, like, cowering in the corners and stuff, and it's like that's a scary villain, because you it's like the whole John Wick thing when they introduced John Wick,
right?
How to introduce a character, right? And it's like, you don't describe how scary they are. You don't have someone monologue about how terrifying they are.
You kill his puppy and you find out how bad he is.
Right. You don't have, you show, you don't tell.
Yeah.
Right? And, like, that was, like, the Vader thing. Is like, they showed that he was terrifying.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the tips and tricks, I guess, too, of, like, portraying a good villain is how you present them.
Yeah.
You know, presentation has a lot to do with it.
Yep. Yeah, it absolutely does. I think it changes with each generation. You know, I think of Vader, if they brought out Vader today, I don't know if he would be as good a villain as they did then, because of the timelines and what the whole world had went through, you know. And now, like, if Vader was never heard of, and then all of a sudden they brought him out today, I think he'd just be an average villain.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with, like, it's kind of like the shift.
Yeah.
Because we kind of went through, like, we went through, like, a period of, like, anti-heroes. It kind of like goes in cycles where you have, like, the pure hero, the anti-hero, the villain is the hero, you know? Like, and it's, like, this cyclical thing. And, like, I guess, I don't know why my brain wants to think, like, John Wick.
Right.
But, like, Vader kind of feels analogous like that to me.
Yeah.
Because he's this mysterious figure who we just see as being powerful.
Right.
We don't have any context, right?
Right.
And so, like, yeah, I feel like it'd be like that kind of vibe. But John Wick, we look at as a hero now.
Right. Yeah.
Not as the villain. And it's kind of interesting to me how that has morphed.
Right.
How what used to be like a villainous quality is now a heroic quality.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're dead on. I think one other group of villains that we really haven't dabbled in too much. And we've talked about it. We've kind of played on it, but I think, like, something big and that's in modern minds is the Game of Thrones. You have that the heavy political villain. Everybody's out there. Every faction, whether you think they're good or bad, is out there trying. I mean, obviously there is one faction that's selfish to doing it for themselves. They're not doing it for anybody, but there's a lot of villains in that show. You think, you know, you're watching this young Targaryen girl going through all these struggles, growing up, and in the end, she ends up being the bad villain anyway, because she, like, tries to, like, just murder and kill everyone, because she's just pissed off.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially a villain, right? I mean,
again, like frame of reference,
yeah,
right?
yeah. No, it's
who's looking at it.
Yeah, I loved that. That is probably the most twisted thing of villains. It's like there's so many villains in that series that you change your mind about 20 times on some of them. You know,
I mean,
it's crazy.
I guess sticking in the modern, well, semi-modern vein of things, going right off of that, like there's a succinct quote I remember from The Dark Knight. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah.
It is, like, that's kind of like what's going on, right?
Right.
That's another great, like, one to dissect.
Right.
Is the cartoonishly evil. The evil because I can be evil.
Doofenshmirtz.
Snidely Whiplash, right? Like, just you're out there twirling your mustache, tying people to train tracks and waiting for the train to run them over while you're cackling. Like, the cartoonishly villainous.
What the heck? The one with the minions in it.
Gru, Despicable Me.
Despicable Me. Yeah, that's Gru, right?
Yeah, so that kind of goes full circle because I thought of him when you were talking about Zorg.
Yep. Yeah, he's kind of along that lines.
Super smart, super genius, but he has all of these incompetent henchmen.
Yep.
And, like, that's a trope as old as time.
Oh, yeah.
And if you ever need, like, a lighthearted villain, that's a great way to do it.
Right.
Is you have this villain who is just, he can't do everything by himself. He's smart enough to figure it all out. But he needs, you know, I have that flaw of I can't stick to a plan. And it's like, no!
Yeah.
You know? That's that, and I've always liked the cartoonishly evil villain. I used that a lot in a campaign. One of the first campaigns I ever ran, Sir Copenhagen was a anti-paladin, and he was just cartoonishly evil. You know, he'd make orphans so that he could have orphan tears to bathe in. You know, just like cartoonishly evil.
That's rough. I like it.
Yeah.
So I guess we've spent a lot of time talking about our villains and like movie villains and RPG villains. Let's kind of tidy this up with talking about some video game villains that you remember, and pretty clearly.
Video game villains?
Yeah, we haven't really delved into the video game villains too much quite yet.
Can I do one more movie one?
Oh yeah, sure.
I want to do one more movie one.
Okay, let's do it.
So this will let me think about a video game one when we go too. So Connor McLeod in Highlander.
Oh.
Do you remember the villain of that movie? He shows up kind of Vader-like at the beginning.
Right. Isn't that can't think of the name of the actor's name.
I'm pretty sure it's the Kurgan, if I remember right.
I can't remember. But.
I'm gonna get absolutely crucified if I got that wrong.
Right.
But that's a really cool villain. Like that was one of the, and like as he's like got the hair missing in the end, like you just see him devolve into madness.
Yep.
Like that. I had to bring that up because I forgot like how much of an impact that villain had on me, especially like in the fantasy setting.
Yep.
In modern fantasy or whatever. Like,
absolutely.
It was super cool to see that. So you must have a video game one.
Yeah. So I actually have a few, but I think the first, I mean, there's a lot of villains. I'm not going to go back to all of them, but I'll touch on a couple of them. There was the villain in Command and Conquer, where they actually had live action video clips.
Oh, Red Alert 3?
No, just regular Command and Conquer. Tiberian Sun. They had I can't think of the guy's name right off the top of my head. Bald guy, good villain. Like, it was a good villain, but it was dated, obviously, because there was limited amount of technology they had. But if we're trying to, I want to kind of move forward to a little bit more modern, that maybe even some of your age and whatnot would, Voss from Far Cry 3.
Okay.
The island villain guy. He was a psychotic villain that he's one of those first villains you love, but you know you hate him because he is causing you problems at every corner. About the time you think you're going to turn the corner and start getting ahead in the game, he comes in and does something. And to me, that's just like, makes you want to play the game even harder. Like, no, never again am I going to let this happen. You have no control over this because it's a video game and it's wrote into it how it's going to work. But that's just a great villain. You know, he's psychotic. He's crazy. He does little bits of here and there to stab your friend, whatever. You know, there's nothing you can do about it. Even though you're the hero, you should be able to do something about it. That was one of my first, like, other than my Command and Conquers and the Warcrafts and stuff like that. I mean, there's great villains and all that stuff, you know. And you should know, you've played some of those types of games. Even in StarCraft, you know, there's the Kerrigan is a pretty good villain.
Yep.
Like, she's an unwilling villain.
Yeah, that's one of those, like, yeah.
She's like, I didn't want to be this way. Like,
yeah.
I was the hero.
Yeah.
And then I got...
Yeah, that was the villain that the society had made, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, them are just a few of the villains that I can think of that I really, really liked in video games. There's obviously... The last villain I absolutely despised... He's in a game you introduced me to. It was Caves of Cud.
Oh.
the 45 level evil warlord that just logs in at the beginning of the game and murders the whole town.
Yeah,
like that villain sucks, man. We don't need that guy anymore.
Yeah. And the best part is that villain is a one-time instance.
Yeah, right.
He was procedurally generated.
I know, right?
But it's great because you can like press L, look at them, and you're like, you get the description of them, their history, and everything. Yeah,
right. It's amazing.
It's a fun one. You know, I'm sitting here, I'm racking my brain about like a video game villain that I remember.
Yep.
And it's gonna sound so stupid, but the one that sticks out to me most is from Pokemon.
Okay.
The original trilogy I'd played, Red, Blue, and Yellow.
Right.
Gary, his name was, you know, I can't remember what his name was in the video games. But long story short, he's just, I'm better than you. You suck.
Oh, that's a good villain. That's a villain. Yeah.
You know, he's like got big bully vibes, like
right.
You know, like playground bully vibes. And like you have to beat him before you beat the game, and it's just so satisfying to like watch him basically temper tantrum and cry, and it's like.
Pokemon's they still do that.
Yeah, it's
your best friend. That's the newest games. Your best friend is basically your arch enemy.
It's funny too because when you get
like,
to
what the freak.
In the second gen, I only ever played through third gen. So the second gen, the guy was like a legitimate like. He'd be like the kid he'd go steal a car to drive up to the gas station to buy cigarettes underage and smoke them at school. You know. Like, that's the kind of villain he was.
Dang.
And then in the third one, your rival is literally just like your best friend. And, like, they're like, oh, yeah, I lost, but that's okay. We're just having fun.
Right.
And it's like, I miss that just, like, playground bully that you just satisfyingly get to just, like, wedgie at the end, basically.
Nice.
Right?
I mean,
it's such, I don't know why that is what sticks with me, but.
Yeah, well, I mean. That's kind of what we were shooting for.
Because at the end of the day, there's some pretty like fantastic, highbrow villains.
Oh yeah.
You know, like.
I mean, Baldur's Gate had some good villains.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate was pretty cool.
Baldur's Gate 3, I should specify. And
so even Baldur's Gate 1.
Yeah, but I mean, right. Well, I was thinking more modern.
Yeah.
Because them are kind of old. A lot of these young folk, unless they go back and play them.
It's funny because the other one that sticks out to me is not a new one, is Bowser.
Yeah.
Bowser's just, I want to kidnap the princess.
Well, I mean, he still wants to do that. He's been doing that for like 30, 40 years.
And it's
man.
like, it's a cartoonish villain for a lighthearted thing. Like,
I think what makes Bowser such a good villain, other than his cartoony, is that if you took him and you made him a modern day villain, say a Batman style villain, that dude would be horrifying.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Big evil spiky turtle boy that just eats the world.
I mean, he was pretty horrifying if you've ever seen the live action Mario Brothers
Oh,
from
yeah.
like the late 90s or early 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, he was pretty terrifying in that. So,
But I mean, yeah, he's a good villain. I like him.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, it's weird that video games. I can't think of as many as I could for other media.
Well, I think because, well, one, a lot of the video games that you talk about and you're really passionate about are the mind type of video games.
The strategy stuff.
Strategy stuff. And there's some villains in those too.
But the villain is usually like yourself trying to like
Yeah,
figure out
yeah, exactly. You're the villain of your own game there.
your own worst enemy.
But I mean, yeah, so villains in video games, I mean, you named a few of them that were perfect. I mean, they're literal villains. That was the arch enemy of the game. That was your nemesis.
Yeah, and a villain doesn't need to be an existential threat to
No.
all of the universe.
No, and it doesn't mean you're gonna die if you lose to him. It just means you lost to him.
Yeah, and you know,
Like-
I think that's probably one of the biggest things is like we have this villain fatigue. This like because we went from like Lord of the Rings to Endgame to
Yeah,
the ultimate Star Wars end of the end of the end.
right.
And it's like there's so many of these like big epic things.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know, just a playground bully that you beat at the end is like a pretty satisfying villain.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it works out wonderful. Yeah. No, absolutely.
But yeah, that's the villains, man. You got anything else?
No, I think, yeah, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I think we covered a lot of stuff. Gave you lots to think about.
And I guess we never did prefaces, but like, I guess the idea was to use this in making games or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all I got, man.
All right, next time.